It was the 90s. Nintendo, with the help of their mustachioed mascot, had amassed a 90% share of the home video game market. Meanwhile, their competitor, Sega, was fighting an uphill battle to maintain relevance outside of the arcades. They had just released the Genesis a couple years prior, with a marketing campaign that painted the NES in an unflattering light. This didn't last long though, as Nintendo's own 16-bit contender, the Super NES, would come soon after, along with yet another flagship Mario hit. But Sega wouldn't take this lying down. Executives and developers scrambled to come up with the company's next big hit, and the pressure was higher than ever before. Character design contests were held, marketing campaigns were drafted, and blood, sweat, and tears were poured out in hopes of revitalizing this quickly declining console. And eventually, from this desperation rose Sega's salvation, a little blue hedgehog named Sonic. Sonic the Hedgehog released in 1991 for the Sega Genesis. With a knack for speed, a rebellious attitude, and a unique spin on platforming that challenged Mario's conventions, Sonic helped Sega reclaim 60% of the video game market, and showed the world that Nintendo wasn't the only place to go for unforgettable gaming experiences. Fast forward to the present, and Sonic is a multimedia icon. He's been around for over 30 years, and he's had a variety of different games, comics, TV shows, and lately, feature films. But while financially the franchise is as successful as ever, it's no secret that Sonic isn't exactly held up to the same pedestal in the gaming sphere as he once was. But ask 10 Sonic fans where the series went wrong and you'll get 10 different answers. Was it the failure of the Saturn? The jump to 3D with Adventure? The disaster of '06? Or was it always bad to begin with? Over the past decade or so, a lot of people have started to adopt the mindset that the original Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Genesis was never good. I've seen this idea presented in various ways, but they all tend to boil down to one key criticism. The game is supposed to be about going fast, but it's not designed around going fast. So what do I think? Personally, I love Sonic the Hedgehog. I find it incredibly replayable, I never get tired of the soundtrack and visuals, and I think its physics-based approach to platforming is genius. But I'd also be kidding myself if I said that this game doesn't have its fair share of problems. After all, the first entry in a series is almost destined to be outclassed by its sequels, and Sonic the Hedgehog is no exception. However, I strongly disagree with the idea that this game, the game that laid down the core foundation of Sonic's identity, was never good. Not only do I believe that it stands on its own merits, I believe there was something here that was lost over the years, and that's what I hope to uncover in this video. Now, I'm willing to bet that there's going to be a few comments on this video that will call me nostalgia biased or a classic fanboy. I hate to break it to you guys, but I actually don't have any nostalgia for this game. In fact, I wasn't even alive in the 90s. I didn't spend my childhood days sat in front of a CRT with a Sega Genesis controller in hand. No, I spent those days with the PS2, PS3, and Nintendo DSi. It wasn't until my teens that I really started to get into the Sonic series. And while Sonic the Hedgehog was the first entry I played, one, it was long after I had been exposed to plenty of other games, and two, I'd soon play the rest of the series within the next couple of years. By that point in my life, playing all the games in a series in chronological order was just my preferred way of experiencing them, because it allowed me to view them from a historical and evolutionary perspective. So call me biased towards Sonic 1 all you want, but just know that you might as well call me biased towards the first game in pretty much any other series I've ever played. Now, with everything hopefully cleared up, and without further ado, this is my review of Sonic the Hedgehog. The manual tells you the whole story setup within the first page. Sonic the Hedgehog takes place in a fantastical location called South Island, where an evil scientist, Dr. Robotnik, wants to take over the world. He's capturing the island's wildlife in order to power evil robots called badniks, and our spiny blue hero sets out to stop him. Here's the cool part though. You don't need the manual to figure out any of this stuff. Despite almost entirely lacking cutscenes, this game manages to communicate its entire plot through pure visual storytelling. The fact that when you defeat a badnik, a little animal pops out, the fact that Robotnik shows up at the end of every zone, and the fact that each area gets progressively more industrialized, all effectively communicate the story without a single word coming out of any character's mouth. In an era where most platformers either relied on the manual for their storytelling or lacked it entirely, Sonic the Hedgehog was one of the few that excelled in this regard. A key reason this works so well is the presentation. These days, first-party developers are usually expected to take advantage of their own hardware the most, but back in the early 90s, the exact opposite was true. Nintendo was the perfect example of this. While their games never looked bad per se, compare their own releases to high-profile third-party offerings and the difference was night and day. I love Super Mario World and think it has a charming art style, but come on, was a measly one layer of parallax really the best they could do? That's where Sonic the Hedgehog comes in. While Nintendo could afford to coast along at this point, Sega still had to prove themselves. So the newly formed Sonic team worked hard to squeeze as much visual fidelity as they could out of this quickly aging hardware, and boy did it pay off. But technical prowess isn't the only strength of Sonic's visuals. I mean, just looking at this game should tell you that right away. The art style has an abstract geometric look that utilizes simple shapes, vibrant colors, and surreal environments that still manage to have a sense of place, whether it's the grassy plains of Green Hill or the moonlit skyline of Starlight Zone. The only environment that doesn't have a grounded setting is the special stage, and that's completely intentional. It's the culmination of everything great about this borderline psychedelic art style, only now it's cranked up to 11. And of course, Sonic the Hedgehog was the first in a long lineage of games with incredible soundtracks. One thing the Genesis had that the Super Nintendo didn't was a sound chip that acted as a mini synthesizer. While its competitor utilized pre-recorded samples, the Genesis had its own distinct sound that I'd argue has aged better. Sonic's soundtrack, composed by Masato Nakamura, perfectly accompanies the art style by combining dreamlike synths with pop music sensibilities, and it stands to this day as one of the most iconic soundtracks in video game history. One of the biggest reasons Sonic the Hedgehog was so successful was its protagonist's character design, not just for its aesthetic appeal, but also for its inseparable connection to the game's core identity. The development team, who would eventually become known as Sonic Team, experimented with various types of animals that might lend themselves well to fun mechanics, and they narrowed it down to two choices: an armadillo or a hedgehog, both for their ability to roll into a ball. The game's lead artist, Naoto Oshima, drafted various ideas for these characters, and the team eventually settled on a blue hedgehog that the world would soon come to know very well. But speed was also on the team's mind. Yuji Naka, Sonic Team's lead programmer at the time before he decided he had better things to do, wanted a game that evolved the gratifying feeling of speedrunning World 1-1 and Super Mario Bros. And say what you will about the guy, but the idea he came up with was nothing short of pure genius. Platformers up to that point had followed a pretty universal gameplay style. The ground was always flat, locomotion was always horizontal, and jumping was your character's only form of vertical movement. You might have occasional slopes and power-ups and whatnot, but they never deviated from that core idea. But Sonic the Hedgehog did something a little different by introducing what some fans simply call momentum, but what I like to refer to as 360-degree pinball physics. Yuji Naka built a game engine that allowed the player character to move on all sorts of previously unthinkable terrain: slopes, curves, half-pipes, and even loop-de-loops. If you had enough traction, you could run up walls and across ceilings without any kind of special moves or gravity-bending nonsense. It was seamless. Suddenly, platforming was no longer restricted to left and right. It was all about going up and down and all around. Combine this with Naoto Oshima's brilliant character design and you have one of the most creative platforming concepts ever conceived. Pressing down on the D-pad will have Sonic roll into a ball, making him more susceptible to the effect of the terrain. Roll while going uphill and you'll slow down, but roll while going downhill and you can get some serious speed that you can then carry up those ramps and loop-de-loops. That's the key takeaway here. Sonic is about speed, and always has been, but how that speed is earned and used is integral to his identity. Both parts of his name go hand in hand. He's not just a fast character who happens to be a hedgehog, nor is he just a hedgehog who happens to go fast. He is fast because of his abilities that are derived from his species. But a good movement system alone a video game does not make, so what other core mechanics does Sonic the Hedgehog incorporate? Well, since the momentum mechanics are a bit of a learning curve, Sonic has fairly lenient offense and defense mechanics compared to other platformers. Your main mode of attack is Sonic's ball form, which is activated automatically anytime you jump. While in games like Mario you defeat enemies by landing on their heads, Sonic's multi-directional gameplay isn't well suited for that approach. So instead, enemies can be defeated at any angle so long as Sonic is in in ball form. But inevitably you will get hit at some point, and that's where those iconic rings come in. These are scattered throughout the levels and act as the game's health system. If you're holding on to at least one ring, you won't die if you get hit. Instead, Sonic will drop all of his rings, and you'll have a limited amount of time to pick some of them back up. This system makes what would otherwise be an unwelcoming gameplay style a little more accessible. Even if you haven't acclimated to the speed or the level design, the lenient nature of the ring system means you have a good chance of recovering from your mistakes, so long as you're diligent about collecting those rings. But that's not the only function that these shiny collectibles serve. In a vacuum, the ring system doesn't provide any incentive to collect more than a few, since for the most part you can just keep juggling the same ring anytime you get hit and be fine. Thankfully, this game understands that and features two mechanics that give the rings more merit. First of all, collecting 100 rings will grant you an extra life. Sonic the Hedgehog does not have a save system, so getting as many lives and continues as you can are crucial to getting through the game. This is weakened somewhat in Sonic Origins, which does away with the life system entirely, but that's where the other incentive comes in. If you manage to hold on to 50 rings by the end of the level, a big ring will appear by the goalpost, and jumping into it will transport Sonic to a special stage. These contain the 6 Chaos Emeralds, which are needed to get the best ending. And if you're playing the original Genesis version, you can also collect rings within these stages to get continues, which allow you to start from the beginning of the last zone you were in if you lose all your lives. All of these mechanics work together to create a unique gameplay identity that was unlike anything anyone had ever seen at the time, and to this day it's hard to come by any modern games that recreate what Sonic the Hedgehog managed to achieve. But what about the level design? Unfortunately, this is where things start to get complicated, and where the most common criticisms of the game start to come in. Despite the 360-degree momentum introduced in this game, the levels don't always take full advantage of it, often focusing more on traditional platforming. To a certain extent, I can understand this. Since Sonic's gameplay was pretty unconventional at the time, they probably didn't want to deviate too much from what people were used to. However, this kind of platforming isn't Sonic's strong suit, so the experience suffers where it is used. 3 of the 6 main zones do take advantage of Sonic's physics to some degree, those being Green Hill, Spring Yard, and Starlight Zone. Green Hill Zone is one of the most iconic opening levels in gaming for a good reason. It eases the player into Sonic's controls and mechanics, and there's faster upper paths for more experienced players to take advantage of. Spring Yard is a lot less open than Green Hill, but it plays with Sonic's momentum a lot more, especially with these massive half-pipes. Starlight Zone is the culmination of both of these zones and is my personal favorite area in the game. But the other 3 zones completely disregard this physics system entirely, and I'm not even exaggerating. Marble, Labyrinth, and Scrap Brain Zone go all in on traditional blocky platforming and are easily the low points of the game. Marble Zone is the best of the bunch, and I've come to appreciate its level design in a vacuum. While it is a slow level compared to Green Hill or Starlight Zone, it's at least competently designed and fun to speedrun. Labyrinth Zone, on the other hand, is the bane of my existence, submerging the Hedgehog in water and forcing you to trudge slowly along while attempting to avoid insta-kill death traps. Scrap Brain Zone starts out strong with Acts 1 and 2, but with Act 3 they just straight up did Labyrinth Zone again because it was so good the first time. When people talk about Sonic the Hedgehog not being designed around going fast, I think these are the levels that they're thinking of. Unless it's the people that just suck. All 3 of these zones force you to wait for moving platforms, wait for swinging maces, wait for air bubbles, wait for conveyor belts. It's a whole lot of waiting. Mandatory waiting, might I add, and that's not a great thing to have in a game about speed. If more of this stuff could be skipped via clever manipulation of the game's physics, I wouldn't be complaining. But these levels have virtually zero sloped or curved terrain. It's all just blocks. The hit or miss nature of Sonic's levels only continue in the special stages. The goal of these levels is to navigate a rotating maze to reach the Chaos Emerald, being sure to avoid the incredibly misleading goal objects that just kick you out of the stage. These special stages vary wildly in quality. Some of them are easy enough, while others put bumpers everywhere and bounce you all over the place, making them insanely tedious. It's a good thing the visuals and music are so relaxing, otherwise my controller would have received a one-way ticket to Drywall Land by now. Overall, the level design in Sonic the Hedgehog is very hit or miss, with half of the levels being good showcases of the game's 360-degree momentum, and the other half being slow, sluggish block platforming with little in the way of player expression. The bosses, on the other hand, are unironically one of the best parts of this game, and a shining example of good platformer boss design in general. If you've seen my 3D Sonic retrospectives, you probably know where I'm going with this. Aside from the final boss, which we'll talk about in the spoiler section, the Dr. Robotnik fights in Sonic the Hedgehog make use of a simple design philosophy. There's no limit to how many times you can hit the boss while it's vulnerable, only the amount of time that it is. Because of this, these fights tend to have more hit points than your average Mario boss, usually around 8. The reason this works so well is that the player's skill is what dictates the pace of the fight, rather than scripted attack cycles. What this does is introduce a risk versus reward element. You can either play it safe and wait for a clear opening, or you can get risky and potentially deal more damage faster. Get too cocky though and you might lose all your rings. It's the same philosophy that makes 3D action games combat fun when done well. That said, there is one gripe I have with the bosses in this game, and that's the lack of incentive for hanging onto your rings. While the special stage portal can appear at the end of Acts 1 and 2 of a zone, in Act 3, the one where you fight the boss, they don't appear at all. I think this was a missed opportunity to tie the boss fights into the rest of the core game loop. Still, that's not a huge issue, and overall, the bosses in Sonic the Hedgehog are outstanding examples of how to reward skillful players. Spoiler alert, skip here if you don't want to see him. The final Dr. Robotnik fight completely defies the game's usual boss design philosophy, and I'd argue it suffers for it. Everything I praise the other bosses for not doing, the final boss does. The pace of the fight is dictated by long attack cycles, and you can only hit Robotnik once while he's vulnerable. Combine that with the fact that you start without any rings, and this boss ends up being tedious. Not hard, just tedious. If this fight was anywhere else in the game, I'd just write it off as that one boss, but the fact that it's supposed to be the finale is just such a shame. Anyway, once you beat Robotnik, he flies off to scheme another day, and Sonic returns to Green Hill where the animals are now free. If you collected all the Chaos Emeralds, Sonic will use them to presumably restore South Island, represented only by a couple of flowers. It would have been a lot cooler if there was a cutscene or something that showed nature reclaiming the rest of the zones, but maybe that would have been too complicated for the Genesis. After that, the credits roll with a medley of every zone theme in the game. The end. I've come to understand some of the criticism that Sonic the Hedgehog has received over the years. Half of the levels don't take advantage of the game's central mechanic, and the ones that do are still a far cry from what we see in later games. The special stages are all over the place, and the ending leaves much to be desired. But even still, I just don't agree with the notion that this game is without merit. Sonic the Hedgehog laid down an incredible foundation with its innovative momentum system and core gameplay mechanics. The other Genesis titles would use this exact same formula to great effect, proving that they pretty much nailed it the first time. So, while this game is far from perfect, it is nonetheless an important one. And from the way I see it, Sonic the Hedgehog was always good. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my other Sonic content and subscribe for more video game content just like this. You can also become a member for just $1 per month to get your name in the credits, exclusive emojis, and a special channel in my Discord server. But either way, stay tuned, thanks for watching, and as always, enjoy life.